Thanks everyone for joining again. I think this is our third one. We do have a plan to make these more kind of structured and to have different sections to the documentation office hours. Hopefully we'll get that up and running in the next couple of weeks. We're beginning to get into a bit of a routine with this. For this one today, we've got a few news updates. We're going to celebrate a couple of the contributions we've actually had already to the Open Documentation Academy. And also, hopefully not as long-winded as last time, we're going to do a quick demo of some of the aspects of GitHub that we think are important. And also, Robert's going to show us a user interface or two to make things a little easier for using with Git. I think at this early stage, I mean, Git has been a bit of a focus for now because we all tend to use it, but we're also recording this. And so one update is actually that if you've not looked already, the previous recordings of the office hours are on the Ubuntu On Air YouTube channel. There are links in the Open Documentation Academy discourse category on the forum. And what I've tried to do in those is really extensively mark the chapter points where we discuss certain aspects of working with Git, so that if you want to see a certain command being demonstrated, then you can just skip to that to see how it actually works. So it's really important that we're doing these live, but also in archiving them, hopefully people will have something they can go back to and refer to. And I actually redid, if you're worried about the demo that I did last Friday, I actually redid that demo to make it a little shorter and a little more slick. So I didn't forget the commands in the middle of doing it all. So you can find that in the forum. This time, hopefully I'm not going to be so ambitious. So we've got a few more tasks. I did want to bring a shout out to, well, I think Demola's here, Keith Taylor, and Ausla, who have all successfully landed contributions to the Academy over the last week or 10 days. It's really fantastic to see. Thanks so much for joining in and making your contributions. Some of the docs are already live, so that feels good. I say this every time, but we're really going to try and create more tasks and keep the ball rolling on this. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that one of our technical authors has created a quite extensive getting started guide to using Git. And they very bravely created a pull request on the Open Documentation Academy repository for integrating that as a getting started guide in the Academy documentation itself. And they've done this so that we can all kind of review the pull request, maybe give it a go and leave comments if we want to. I think it already looks great, it's comprehensive, but this is the kind of process that we typically go through as technical authors. And so they've bravely put themselves forward with this big contribution so that you can all see how it actually happens live as we create a set of documentation that we can all use for Git. And if any of the Git stuff has been confusing in the way that we've been talking about it, hopefully this getting started guide will help make things clearer, or at least provide something as a reference guide if you get stuck. So to be able to, just to show, it kind of fits in with the next stage where I wanted to demo a couple of things. So I'll share my screen again and I can show you where to actually find that pull request. Let me just, I don't know why I find the Google UI so confusing. This is my desktop again. I hope it's not too small. So this is the Open Documentation Academy GitHub repository opened in Firefox on my desktop. If you wanted to see any of the issues that have been closed that people have worked on, for example, you could click on the Issues tab here. And then it's grayed out. This is often quite difficult to see actually, but there's a closed link here. And clicking on the closed link, you can see that this was the test issue that I used for demonstration last week. But otherwise, these are the other issues that have been previously opened that people have done some work on, and the work has been completed and the issue has been closed. Either the document has landed in part of the repo itself, or we've been able to publish it. So the pull request, all the pull requests that people do come in the pull request tab. And this is the getting started guide I was just talking about. And S. Macon is the technical author who's done all this work. They've written this great background to why the work's been done, and you can actually find all of the files that have been contributed to this set of documentation, including images and text, by clicking on the Files tab. The first one is actually updating the README for the repository itself to link to this as a resource, and then the remainder of it are the files that have been written to go through all the details of Git. You can see how comprehensive it is. So I invite you all to take a look, and if you feel it needs something or is missing something, or you just think it's great, then put your +1 on the pull request. It's a great experiment for trying to see how these things work, and that's what we've done for the other contributions as well. So with the browser open, I thought I would just show a few things. We've done these, I think, as we admitted last week, we've kind of done this perhaps in the wrong order now, in doing the most difficult part of Git first, which was the kind of demo of Git on the command line. And we really should be demonstrating how to use the integrated GitHub editor, which takes a lot of the pain away if you want to do this without using any of the command line or even having any knowledge of what actually Git does in the background. And we are going to revisit that in a future office hours. But just for now, we thought it would be useful to kind of show why Git is useful, and Git is useful, GitHub is useful, and worth going through this perhaps learning curve in getting to use it. So in another tab on my browser, I've actually opened up Snapd. Snapd is the product that I do a lot of documentation on. It's the background kind of service that provides all the functionality for the Snap packaging. This project has been in development for many years, and so there's a long history of contributions here. And you can dive into any of these contributions. So in fact, I mean, I'll try a text file. But so we have a markdown file. So this below here, if it's not obvious, these are the directories in the project, and below here are the actual files. And this contributing.md file is a markdown formatted text file, which is kind of standard for a lot of GitHub repositories and open source projects on onboarding people to contributing to the project. And so this is our guide for people who may want to contribute, usually their source code to the project. You can see that as it's just a text file, it's rendered as text. If it was code, you'd get syntax highlighting. In fact, it doesn't really work with Markdown, but that's the reason why the headings are blue and the links are this kind of light blue in my browser. One very interesting, I mean, this is something I really love about Git, although it's misnamed probably by Linus Torvalds. It's called blame. And blame basically tells you who's to blame for every line in a file. So you can see that quite a few of these lines, they're my fault. And just to the right of my little avatar there, you can see the merge that committed that change. And if you hover over it, you can see the comments that I've left in creating in adding the commits to the thing that became a pull request that was then merged into the repository. If you remember what I went over last week, I won't go into too much detail, but it's actually a really great way of looking into who's added something and also finding your way back to often the pull request, which describes the motivation behind something. And I think the reason why I find this useful, and I think a lot of technical authors find this useful, is if you were like, I find myself very often documenting interfaces in Snap, for example. So all the code for interfaces live in this directory and typically in the built-in directory. And while developers will sometimes provide a minimal set of documentation, it doesn't often answer all the questions. So before perhaps going to the developer and asking them for questions, I will go to the code. And while we don't expect anyone to be able to read code, the comments can often shed a great deal of light on why something has been done. So I'll just find one of these interfaces as an example. I'll choose something that's been recently updated that isn't too technical. You can see when all the files were last updated, and you can also see the commit message for the last update to that file as well. There's lots of links. Let's choose something media control. So this is a Go source file, and as you can see, it's still got the blame in here, but now it's actually one person who's done most of the work here. But if you wanted to find out, for example, if all they've left is this is a comment in source code. So this is something that I might try and use for the documentation, but I might try and get more details from that by looking at the pull request that they created. And that's linked to here. And you can see the commit messages related to that pull request. So this was really just what I wanted to show, that the reason why we're kind of using Git and why we all find it so useful and worth that kind of initial energy in trying to learn it and get to grips with it is because it provides such a powerful way of looking at the work that you've done and the work that other people have done and understanding it within the context of a whole project. And that's version control in general, but Git is very good at this, and the GitHub UI is also very good as well for introspecting all of this information. We can cover this in more detail later, but that's just what I wanted to show for the motivation of it. I don't know if you're ready to show any UIs, Robert, but maybe I thought it'd be okay to hand it over to you.
Yep, let's.
Thanks.
So last time we were talking about this a little bit, that Git does not really need to be driven only from the command line. First of all, there's the GitHub UI, or other Git providers usually provide some sort of a UI as well. GitLab, of course, is the prime example. But there are also GUI tools as well as TUI tools. TUI meaning text user interface, and I'm quite partial to those because they just they keep you in the terminal. I tend to do most of the stuff in the terminal anyway, but these little helpers are just right there waiting for some interactive action. You can do browsing easily and so forth. So I prepared just a few examples to give you an idea and sort of to whet your appetite. Let me. Oh, it doesn't let me share my screen. Crap.
I'm probably going to give you permissions, Robert. Hold on just a sec.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To do that.
Add as a co-host. I think that's done it.
Oh yeah, good. That's nice. And choose the window. Oh. Window. Why is it? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just not kidding. And okay, that's unfortunate. I don't know what's happening, but it doesn't let me share the particular window that I want to share. So I will try to share the entire screen and hope the best. Okay. Let me know if you can see it and if it's actually legible.
Looks good to me.
Okay, so here I have jumped in right into one of those tools. I'm going to introduce you to three of them. The two of them are quite similar. One is a little bit different, and I'm going to be starting from the most complex one, I would say, or probably most feature-rich one. And obviously, it's called Lazygit, because why anything else? What we are looking at is actually the inside of the Open Documentation Academy repository. Right now, I have selected here a box in the bottom left where I'm just scrolling through the history, scrolling through the commit history. As you can see on the right, I can see what those commits were about, not only what the commit hash is, but also what is the what are the changes Of course, this is something that in the background is done by Git. So this is just a nicely configured way of viewing the history. There are other windows here that I can jump into. For example, when I'm in this one, I'm browsing through the branches. Now we only have 2 branches in this repository, the main one, and it shows the history of the main one on the right. Then there's another one that shows the history of the one that's selected. If I go to another, then I'm looking at the files and I'm looking at the current current state of things. So right now there are no changed files in the repository, so it says there's nothing is happening. Anyway, I'm not going to go into too many details about this one because this tool, Lazygit, actually has the best documentation or not even documentation, but also guidance that's really hands-on. They have ton of animated GIFs that show what can be done with the tool. That they sit right in the repository, and okay, I'll see. Okay, let me share with you. Okay, it's not gonna let me share with you the address. Right, and I'm just gonna put it in the chat. And if you browse to this repository, then you're gonna see that they really have guidance. What's that?
I also did.
Oh, you already did.
He's already
okay, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna paste the other ones as well. Okay, good collaboration. Anyway, as I said, if you scroll down there, you're gonna see lots of things happening in these nicely prepared animated GIFs, and it really gives you a good idea about what you can do with the tool. And with this tool, you can do pretty much anything that you can do with Git. It's really feature rich. You can do commits, you can do staging, you can do rebasing, and if you feel like that, if you feel like putting a bit of effort into getting familiar with the tool, then you don't need to touch the command line ever again. I don't think there actually is something that this tool doesn't do that the command line Git commands would do on top of that. Of course, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but some of the things are really neat and make life easier if you're up to it. That being said, it is quite complex. It just there's a bit of a steep learning curve. So these animated GIFs, they help, but to me, that's it's not the tool that I would choose. So let me go into another one, and that would be gitui with only one T, so gitui. And let's see, we're in the same repository, but this looks pretty sparse. There's nothing in there, and that's because I'm on the status tab. At the top here, you can see the line with tabs, and it has these 5 main tabs. That makes it a whole lot more straightforward in my view, this tool, because you can just you can choose from those. You can either skip right to the individual tabs using numbers, or you can use the tab key just to cycle through them. So right now we're in the status tab, and as I said, in this particular repository on my local machine, nothing has changed. I haven't done anything here. No changes, so it doesn't say anything. No unstate changes, no state changes, and so forth. I can go into log, and we see the pretty straightforward history of this repository. If I click, if I hit enter on a change, it will just show me what was happening in that change. There's the commit message, the date, and so forth. And if I scroll to the right, then it actually lets me see what the diff is, what happened in that change, and in what file that change occurred. So I can go back and just scroll through the history very easily. But let's go to the other tabs. So this one lets me browse the files in the repository. That's really nice. You can see that it just basically displays whatever's in there. And lets you do, for example, the git blame. So I am now on the README, and as Graham was pointing out before, that's one of the commands. And this one lets you very nicely browse through. So you see that you've got syntax highlighting and so forth, which is something that the basic Git command line wouldn't give you out of the box. And you can very nicely see which line was changed by whom. Anyway, let's go to another tab. And this one's called stashing. And that would be stashing in Git is something that basically if you just want to get on with your work and you want to save some changes for later, you stash them. You stash them, Git pretends not to see them anymore, and your repository is clean. That's what I have done prior to this meeting. I have done one silly little change. So now I'm in the 5th and final tab. It's one called stashes, and it lists my stashes. Those are my stash changes. And if I just hit enter, it informs me that the stash will be applied and removed, of course, from the list of stashes. I can either do that or not. I can also just inspect the stash, see what happened in the stash. So now I'm back in the sort of diff view that I showed you before. And again, it shows me that in the README file, I have added the word changes. Just over here, nothing else happened in this thing. So this is my stash. So let's go back and apply the stash. So that now happened, and I see it automatically put me on the status tab, which makes sense because the status changed in the repository. And now we see that there are some unstaged changes. We can see what those changes are. I added a line or a couple of lines, and I can just hit enter, and that stages the changes for me. Really easy. So now the changes are staged, and I can do a commit. And of course, it can do commit, it can undo commits, and so forth. But to me, this is a much more straightforward tool because it just, in my view, the learning curve is not that steep. And it's really simple, really straightforward. If I hit enter again, I have just unstaged that change, and nothing is happening. So if I go to the stashing tab, I can just hit the key S in this case, as in stash or save. It lets me optionally name the stash. If I don't, I just hit enter, and the changes are stashed, and the repository is clean. There is nothing happening. So yeah, so that was another tool. I quite like this one. I think that it's really useful for browsing, changes and doing basic things, and also for sort of wrapping your head around what's happening in the repository. Yeah, Graham, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if you could explain a little about what stashes are.
Oh yeah, I was really brief about that. Yeah, the stashing is basically whenever you do any changes to files in the repository, then Git knows about it. So your repository status, I believe it's called unclean or something like that, meaning that you need to do something about those changes before you can really, for example, do merges or other things. So, or changing branches and so forth. So if you just want to, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready to commit those changes. I'm not ready to do those changes. Still I'm working on them and so forth, or I want to save them for later. You stash them. You just do git stash on the command line, or in this case, you would just hit enter on the stashing tab, and the changes are saved. Git still knows about them. You don't lose the changes, but your repository status is now clean, and you can start ahead, do some other stuff, create other branches and so forth, and Git behaves as if nothing happened, but your changes are safely stashed away.
Thanks, Robert.
And finally, let me switch to another one. So this is a final tool that I wanted to change, that I wanted to show, and it's called TIG, T-I-G, so it's just Git in reverse. I'm in a different repository. You can see that this repository is, the history is very linear. Nothing is happening here. It's the same contributor all over again with a few exceptions. but I just chose that to let you know, or to show you how this tool works. I will show you another repository in a second. If I hit enter on any one of those commits in the history, it will show here on the side what changes and in what files were happening. This is a very nice diff view actually, because if you see, and not only it shows the stuff here on the right, like what's the name, what's the date, and so forth, and the hash of the commit, but it also shows a list of files that were affected by that commit. You can of course configure git log to do the same for you, but this one is it's out of the box, and then you can scroll through the changes in the individual files and see very nicely with syntax highlighting what happened there. I mean, not syntax highlighting, but change highlighting, what was going on. And if I continue scrolling through the history, it will just really quickly keep changing the view and showing me what was happening. So for me, this is probably the most useful tool that I would use on a daily basis sometimes, and I'm in a repository that's got quite a lot of history. If I just want to browse through changes, this is really useful. And the tool is quite smart also. For example, let me show you. Now I have increased the font size in terminal, and you see that it automatically switched to a better view to accommodate the larger fonts. So if you resize the window, it will do that automatically as well. I find that quite nice, and not many GUI programs actually do that. So let me go back to the previews view. There's extensive help, and while the other tools are very full-featured, and they're quite customizable as well, but this one probably takes the cake in the customization department, because you can bend this tool to do pretty much anything. There are quite a few built-in functions, but they're quite basic, and it takes a bit of learning just to see the different views, but they're pretty straightforward, and they're easy to learn, because the diff view, you just hit D, the log view, you hit L, the blame view, you hit B, and so forth in the main view. Of course, the main view is M, the shortcut, so it's pretty easy. The help screen is under H. So that part is easy, but it's possible to, as I said, to configure many limitless amount of other commands that can do anything you want with your custom commands in Git and so forth. What's also nice that you can use this tool as a sort of an interpreter. So, like for example, if you do the git show command, which git show is shows you what happened in a commit, or what was the last commit that happened in a repository, you can pipe this into TIG, into TIG, and it will just show you the same thing, except with all these nice features such as the highlighting, the colors, and so forth. Now let me switch to a different repository to show you one other thing. Now this is a different repository for a different project. As you can see here, the lines in the middle, they're not so linear anymore. And this is something that also regular Git can show you with git log, but here you can just browse through it really easily, and you see how the different branches were happening, what was happening in history and when they were merged. So who started, what changes when those changes went into the main branch, when they were merged, and so forth. And of course, I can see the merge commits as well. They don't show any changes, because merge commit basically is just the merging of two histories, of two branches, and so forth. There's one other thing that I wanted to show you, and I hope I had it prepared here. And oh yeah, so TIG is quite powerful from the command line as well. And one thing that it does very nicely, you can, of course, you can use regular Git to view changes between different branches or between different two commits and so forth. With TIG, you can do it as well, but you can do it in the user interface. So right here, I have fired up TIG with two branches, specified on the command line. And what it shows me is the same view as before. It's always the same thing, except this is a view of the history that happened between the two branches. So what is the difference between the two branches? Now, I find that particularly useful as well. Like if you use the git diff command on the command line and specify two branches to show the difference, it will show you the difference. But it's very kind of hard to browse through that. You can, of course, page the output and scroll through it to your liking, but it does not give you this nice way of scrolling through different commits that actually constitute the difference between the two branches or between any two places in history in a Git repository. You can specify two commit hashes or a commit hash and a branch, for example, and it will still show you this nicely rendered way of browsing through the changes. So yeah, I will paste the thanks, Artem. I see that the URLs are already in there. So check them out. Pig is a part of the pretty much any Linux distributions repository, including Ubuntu. So you can just do apt-get install pig. The other ones, they are not in Ubuntu in the main repositories, but they are very simple to install. You can just browse to the releases page in their GitHub repository and download the ready-made binary for your distribution. I mean, not distribution, but for a platform. For all Linuxes, it's going to be one. For all the other, it's there as well, like for macOS and so forth. And you just unpack it and put it in your path, such as in your home directory .local /bin, and it's going to be ready for use. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand it over back to Graham because there's somebody at the door.
Thanks very much, Robert. That was really useful. Yeah, Artem, I'll try and answer the question on Robert's behalf if you like.
Actually, not so much of a question, but a brief commentary. I just wanted to mention that besides the dedicated tools, you will also get all kinds of plugins or degrees of integrated support with just about any IDE or text editor that's out there. For example, you can get GitLens with VS Code if you are not maybe averse to proprietary solutions. You can get plugins for Vim, NeoVim, just about anything that's out there. So again, if you don't like to use specialized tools for just about anything, if you like to have everything in one place, maybe that's a way to approach this, because you will get at least some degree of the same functionality there. That's all.
Thanks, Artem. I've got I think us showing our kind of editing environments is something that we should do in the future, but I'm also aware that probably each one of us could easily fill the whole hour just talking about whatever environment we use, but we should do it. I know that in Vim there's a UI that I use that's very similar to the TIG one that we just saw, so you can get all that within the editing environment. I've also realized in listening to this that there's a lot of terminology that if people are new to Git, they may not know. Things like hashes, which is a unique identifier for every single kind of contribution to a Git repository or commit. And the diffs that we were looking at, I think they look like complicated files. They were the files that were sometimes colored green and red with the pluses and the minuses. And they're often used to show the changes. GitHub actually has different views for looking at the changes between two files, and diff is the old Unix way of basically pluses for the bits that have been added and minuses for the bits that have been taken away. So it really looks more complicated than it really is, and maybe these are things that we should all document somewhere, or even in the academy, to make it easier to onboard people with this kind of new terminology, which must sound so bewildering. It's been 37 minutes. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then if anybody wants to ask any questions, then you're more than welcome to. I'll stop the recording so that there's